They will never say it out loud, not once, not even when it's eating them alive from the inside. That's the part about avoidant people that nobody really talks about. They're not cold, they're not robots, they're not incapable of feeling things deeply. What they actually are is terrified of needing anyone, and that fear runs so deep that they've spent years convincing themselves they don't need anything from anyone at all. But they do. They absolutely do. And what they're secretly craving isn't what most people would guess. You probably clicked on this expecting something about emotional intimacy or vulnerability or some soft therapy buzzword dressed up in a nice bow. That's not what this is. This goes sharper and deeper than that. This is about 5 specific things that avoidant people are quietly, desperately, and secretly craving every single day of their lives. Things that pull at them harder than physical desire ever could. Things they will never come out and ask for. Things they will actively push away with one hand while silently begging for with the other. And once you understand these 5 things, you will never look at an avoidant person the same way again. Whether you're in a relationship with someone like this, whether you were raised by someone like this, or whether you're sitting here right now recognizing pieces of yourself, this is going to hit differently than anything you've read before. So get ready, because we're not staying on the surface today. We're going all the way in. Before we get to the 5 things themselves, we need to understand what's actually happening underneath the surface of the avoidant mind. You need to understand why avoidant people crave what they crave, and just as importantly, why they can never bring themselves to admit it. Without that foundation, the 5 things are going to feel like nothing more than a checklist. And this isn't a checklist. This is a map into one of the most misunderstood psychological territories in all of human relationships. The avoidant attachment style doesn't just show up out of nowhere one day. It gets built piece by piece, almost always in childhood, through a very particular and very painful kind of experience. The experience of reaching out for someone and being met with indifference, dismissal, mockery, or plain emotional unavailability. Picture being a small child, reaching out for comfort and being told to stop crying. Picture needing reassurance and instead getting a blank stare from the very person you depended on most in the world. Picture expressing a need out loud and watching that person go cold, or annoyed, or simply disappear, again and again and again. What does a child learn from that? That child learns that needing things is dangerous, that needing leads straight to pain, that the safest option is to become entirely self-sufficient, to shrink the need down until it seems to vanish altogether. Psychologists call this a deactivating strategy, a way of quietly shutting down the whole attachment system, so the vulnerability that comes with wanting connection never gets another chance to expose you to rejection. And here's the part that really gets me. It works. For a while, it works beautifully. That avoidant child grows into an avoidant adult who is highly capable, often strikingly independent, frequently sharp and impressive intellectually, and underneath all of it, profoundly, deeply lonely in a way they can't even put into words. Because the very strategy that once kept them safe as a kid becomes the prison they're locked inside as a grown adult. And inside that prison, the needs never actually disappeared. They didn't evaporate into thin air. They went underground. They got buried under layers of self-reliance, emotional distance, and the carefully constructed identity of someone who supposedly doesn't need anybody. But things that get buried don't stay buried forever. They leak out. They surface in strange sideways ways. They create a hunger that the avoidant person can feel but can't name, can't identify, and definitely can't ask for directly. And that hunger is exactly what we're digging into today. So when I say avoidant people crave these 5 things more than sex, I want to be really clear about what I mean by that. For a lot of avoidant people, sex is actually the easier option. It's physical. It has boundaries. It has a clear beginning and a clear end. It doesn't demand sustained emotional exposure, and it can be neatly compartmentalized into its own little box. But the 5 things we're about to talk about can't be boxed up like that. They go straight for the core. They slip right past all the usual defenses. They reach into the exact place where the original wound still lives. And that's precisely why avoidant people crave them so intensely, and why they'll do almost anything to avoid actually receiving them. The The first thing avoidant people crave more than sex is to be truly known without being judged for it. Not known on the surface, not the way a coworker knows your coffee order or a friend knows your sense of humor. Truly known, deeply known, the kind of knowing where someone sees your contradictions, your darker corners, your softest and most exposed parts, and chooses to stay anyway. Chooses to keep respecting you. Chooses to look at you the exact same way they did before they saw all of it. Now understand this, the avoidant person has spent years, sometimes their entire life, presenting a carefully curated version of themselves to the world, and they've gotten remarkably good at it. They can be charming, they can be interesting, sharp, well-read, even warm in short little bursts. But there's always a wall there, there's always a version being performed for the audience. There's always some part of them locked away in a back room, not because they enjoy the isolation, but because the last time they let that part show, or even imagined letting it show, it felt like the world was ending. And here's the heartbreaking piece of it. The very act of hiding themselves creates the longing in the first place, because you can't feel truly connected to someone who only ever meets your performed self. Deep down, they know you don't really know them, and that knowledge creates its own particular kind of loneliness, one that can feel even worse than being completely alone, because you're physically present in the room, you're even engaging in the conversation, and yet you're fundamentally unreachable. Some part of you is quietly grieving that, even while you keep the whole performance running. Avoidant people will test this craving in small, indirect ways. They'll drop little fragments of the truth here and there, tiny experiments to see what happens. They'll say something slightly vulnerable, slightly revealing, and then immediately deflect with a joke, an intellectual tangent, or a sudden change of subject, and they're watching you closely the entire time. They're watching to see if you pounce on it, because that will trigger them instantly. They're watching to see if you brush it off, because that confirms every fear they already had. They're watching to see if you can simply sit with it calmly, without blowing it up into a whole conversation, without turning it into an impromptu therapy session, without suddenly getting too close too fast. And if you can manage to do that consistently over time, something starts to shift. Not overnight, not dramatically, but something does loosen, because the hunger to be known is completely real. And when someone finally offers a space that feels safe enough, even the most well-armored defense system starts to at least consider the possibility of letting someone in. The tragedy is that most avoidant people end up sabotaging things right at that exact moment. The instant someone gets genuinely close to actually knowing them, the internal alarm system fires up. Suddenly the relationship feels suffocating. Suddenly it feels like too much, too fast. Suddenly there's a convenient reason to pull back, to create distance, to manufacture some flaw in the other person that justifies the retreat, because being known means being exposed. And for the avoidant, exposure isn't just uncomfortable, it feels existentially dangerous, even though the craving underneath never actually stops. The second thing avoidant people crave more than sex is a steady, non-demanding presence. Let me be specific here, because this one gets misread constantly. When avoidant people pull away, go quiet, or create physical or emotional distance, the usual interpretation is that they simply want to be left alone. And yes, they genuinely do need solitude. They genuinely do need space. That part is real. But underneath that withdrawal, something else is happening too. They're waiting to see if you'll still be there when they eventually come back. Waiting to see whether your presence depends on how well they perform connection. Waiting to see if you demand something from them just to earn the right to stick around, or whether you can simply exist alongside them without extracting emotional labor as the price of admission. This is what I'd call the craving for a safe witness. Someone who's present without being intrusive. Someone who's warm without being needy. Someone whose own sense of stability doesn't hinge on whether the avoidant person is being open, chatty, or emotionally available in any given moment. Someone who can sit in the same room and simply exist beside them without expecting the avoidant person to manage their feelings on top of everything else. Avoidant people often crave a rare kind of emotional safety, a steady presence that accepts them without pressure, demands, or attempts to change them. They may only recognize the value of this acceptance after losing someone who offered it. Beneath their independence, many avoidant individuals also deeply desire respect for their abilities and competence because achievement often became their way of feeling valuable and secure. For them, being appreciated for what they do can feel safer than being vulnerable about who they are. So when you genuinely see their competence, when you recognize it and respect it instead of trying to shrink it or manage it down to make yourself more comfortable, you're speaking directly to the part of them that's been working their whole life just to be seen as capable. You're touching the foundation of their self-image in a way that matters enormously. But here's a trap so many people fall right into, especially partners who are earnestly trying to build emotional intimacy with an avoidant person. They try to reveal the softer side underneath. They say things like, "You don't always have to be so strong," or "It's okay to be vulnerable," or "You're more than just your achievements," and they absolutely mean it lovingly. They intend it as an invitation. But what the avoidant person actually hears is something entirely different. What they hear is, the thing you built your entire sense of worth on doesn't really matter that much. The competence they spent a lifetime developing just to survive is suddenly being minimized. The self they carefully constructed to stay safe is being asked to dissolve, and that's terrifying. That's not intimacy to the avoidant person. That feels like annihilation. What the avoidant person actually needs, what they're truly craving, is for someone to respect their competence and still stay curious about who they are underneath it. Not as a replacement for the competence, but alongside it. Something closer to, "I see how capable you are, and I'm still curious about who you are when nobody needs you to perform that capability." That combination is what can actually get through because it doesn't ask them to strip off their armor entirely. It just asks whether they might want to take it off for a little while sometimes. When an avoidant person feels genuinely respected for their competence, not managed, not treated like a project to be fixed, but respected as a capable adult who earned their expertise, those moments build a kind of trust that's incredibly hard to create any other way. And that trust becomes the soil where something deeper can very slowly begin to grow. The fourth thing avoidant people crave more than sex is joy and lightness that never turns heavy. This one almost nobody talks about, and it matters a great deal because there's a stereotype floating around that avoidant people are always serious, withdrawn, emotionally flat. And sure, some of them do come across that way, but plenty of avoidant people have a real capacity for humor, for playfulness, for genuine delight in ideas, experiences, or plain absurdity, and they treasure that capacity deeply, even when they rarely let it show, because play and lightness are ways of connecting that don't demand direct emotional disclosure. They're ways of being with someone that feels safe precisely because they don't come with the pressure of "sit down and tell me how you feel." What avoidant people are craving here is simply the ability to enjoy someone's company, to laugh together, to get curious together about something interesting or funny or strange, without that moment automatically becoming a doorway into a deeper emotional conversation they never agreed to have. The avoidant person wants to have a good time without that good time being treated as evidence that they're capable of emotional depth and should therefore be providing a lot more of it on demand. They want lightness that stays light, not lightness that's secretly setting up the heaviness that follows. Plenty of avoidant people have lived through the experience of genuinely letting their guard down in a light, playful moment, only to have their partner immediately use that opening as leverage. "Oh, see, you can be open, why can't you be like this all the time?" Or, "You seem so happy right now, so I want to talk about where we actually stand." And in that moment, the avoidant person learns something painful. Even lightness isn't safe. Even joy can turn into an ambush for the exact kind of emotional demand they've spent their whole life trying to avoid. So they start policing their own enjoyment. They pull back even from moments of real delight because those moments have become tangled up with the threat of emotional confrontation. What they're craving is someone who can simply be in the light with them, someone who can laugh without turning the laugh into a bigger statement, someone who can enjoy a movie together and not need to dissect it afterward, someone who can have a genuinely wonderful afternoon and let it just be a wonderful afternoon, without steering it into a conversation about the future of the relationship or turning it into an excuse to dig through their feelings. The avoidant person is craving a version of connection that feels like freedom rather than obligation. Joy that gets to just be joy. It sounds so simple, and yet it's almost never what they actually get. The fifth thing avoidant people crave more than sex is being chosen again and again without having to earn it every single time. Sit with that one for a moment, because this is the deepest of the five. This is the one that cuts closest to the original wound. This is the thing avoidant people want so badly that the wanting itself is almost unbearable to sit with. At the very core of the avoidant experience sits a belief, one installed so early and so thoroughly that it functions almost like an established fact of reality to them. The belief goes something like this: I'm only acceptable when I'm performing well. I'm only lovable when I'm useful. I'm only chosen when I'm giving someone a reason to choose me. Unconditional positive regard, the experience of being wanted and chosen simply for who you are, not for what you do or provide or accomplish, either never existed in the avoidant person's early environment, or existed so inconsistently that it never became a felt sense of safety they could actually rely on. So the avoidant person grows up doing one of two things. Either they stop expecting to be chosen at all, which shows up as the deeply withdrawn, seemingly uninterested avoidant person who keeps everyone at a comfortable distance and tells themselves they genuinely prefer it that way. Or they exhaust themselves constantly performing, achieving, being useful, being exceptional, being the person nobody could possibly want to walk away from, all while endlessly bracing for the day the performance finally falls short and the choosing quietly stops. What they're craving, what they've always been craving, is the experience of being chosen on some perfectly ordinary Tuesday when they're tired and unremarkable and not performing anything at all. Being wanted, not because they solved some problem, not because they impressed someone, not because they remembered an important detail or showed up in some exceptional way, but simply because they exist. Being loved not for their highlight reel, but for their mundane, unpolished, entirely ordinary self. That's the craving. And it's enormous. So enormous that most avoidant people can't even let themselves consciously want it, because the wanting itself feels like too much to bear. Because if you let yourself want it and don't get it, the pain that follows is catastrophic. It's far easier to convince yourself you don't need it at all, but you do. Every avoidant person does. Every avoidant person who's ever kept somebody at arm's length, who's ever gone quiet in the middle of an argument, who's ever disappeared without any explanation, who's ever said, I just need some space, without being able to explain what was really happening underneath. Every single one of them is, at some level, asking the exact same silent question. Will you still choose me if I give you nothing to choose me for? Will you still be here if I'm not impressive? Will you stay if I'm just a regular, flawed, ordinary person with no performance attached to any of it? And here's the cruel irony of the whole thing. The avoidant person can't ask that question directly, because asking it would require exactly the kind of vulnerability their entire system is built to avoid. So instead, they test it, they create distance and watch to see if you come back. They go cold and watch to see if you walk away. They fall silent and watch to see if you can handle it without flinching. They're not actually trying to push you away, even though it looks exactly like that from the outside. They're trying to answer a question they can't bring themselves to ask out loud. And whatever answer they get, whether you stay or go, whether you chase or withdraw, whether you push back or hold steady, that answer becomes evidence. Evidence about whether the world is even the kind of place where being chosen simply for being yourself is possible at all. Most avoidant people have collected years and years of evidence suggesting it isn't, and that accumulated evidence, all those interactions confirming their core belief over and over, is exactly what keeps the wall standing. Not stubbornness, not selfishness, not any real desire to cause pain. Just deeply learned, deeply felt evidence that needing is dangerous, that wanting is risky, and that hoping only sets you up for the kind of pain they decided long ago, somewhere back in childhood, they were never going to let themselves feel again. So here's what I want you to walk away with, because we've covered a lot of ground, and I don't want you leaving with just information. I want you to leave with something you can actually use, something that changes how you see this. Whether you're in a relationship with an avoidant person, trying to understand one, or trying to understand yourself through everything we've just talked about, here's what matters most. The distance is not rejection. The silence is not indifference. The pulling away is not some statement about your worth. It's a protective move coming from a nervous system that learned very early on that connection itself was dangerous. And all 5 of these cravings, being truly known, being witnessed without demands, having their competence respected, experiencing joy that doesn't turn heavy, being chosen without having to earn it over and over, all 5 of them are ultimately pointing toward the exact same thing. Safety, not comfort, not luxury, not even love in the way we usually talk about love in movies and songs. Safety, the felt sense in the body and in the nervous system that it's genuinely okay to exist here, that it's okay to be present without performing, that simply being here isn't going to cost them everything they have. You can't manufacture that kind of safety with grand romantic gestures. You can't build it by chasing harder or issuing ultimatums or handing someone a stack of articles about attachment theory and hoping for a light bulb moment. Safety gets built slowly, through consistency, through doing what you say you'll do, through never making someone's vulnerability the price of your presence, through respecting the person they actually are rather than fixating on the person you wish they'd eventually become. And that is incredibly hard work, especially when you're the one hurting, especially when you're the one whose own needs aren't being met, especially when you're the one carrying the emotional labor of building a container safe enough for someone who might never fully lower their walls. And I want to be honest about that part too, because this isn't a script for fixing an avoidant person. This isn't a guide for loving them into healing. Healing is their work, their responsibility, just as understanding your own attachment wounds is your work and your responsibility. What this actually is a window into why avoidant people are the way they are. Why the cravings that make complete sense from inside their own experience are exactly the cravings they're least equipped to express or even receive. Why the longing for connection and the terror of connection somehow exist in the same place at the same time inside the very same person. And if you're the avoidant one reading this right now, I want to say something directly to you. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not incapable of love or connection or real depth. You built a system that protected you back when you genuinely needed protecting. And that same system is costing you something now. It's costing you the very things you crave most: the knowing, the presence, the respect, the joy, the choosing. And the real work here isn't about tearing yourself apart. It isn't about forcing vulnerability before you're actually ready for it. It's about slowly, gently, with the right support around you, starting to question whether the evidence you've gathered over the years actually reflects the truth of what's possible. Whether the beliefs that got installed in you before you ever had a say in the matter are still serving you now, or whether it might finally be time to start gathering new evidence. Because the 5 things you crave more than sex, they're out there, they exist. Real people have experienced them. Avoidant people, with time, with effort, and with the right support, have experienced them too. Not perfectly, not constantly, but enough. Enough to know that this hunger doesn't have to go unfed forever. Enough to know that safety isn't just an abstract concept floating around in a psychology book. It's a felt experience, and it's possible, even for a nervous system that's been standing guard for decades without a break. And that possibility, small and fragile and completely real, is worth something. It's worth the discomfort of looking at all of this clearly. It's worth the difficulty of actually doing the work. It's worth the vulnerability of admitting, even just quietly to yourself, right where you are, that you don't only want independence. You want to be known. You want someone to stay for you. You want someone to see all of it, every part, and choose you anyway. Not because you earned it through some performance, but because you're worth choosing in the first place. That's the craving hiding underneath all that distance. That's the thing avoidant people can never quite bring themselves to admit, and now you know it too.